Hey guys, got some problems with my 1995 Ford F-250. It's got the 7.3 liter Powerstroke diesel engine, and now that it's cold out, it doesn't like to run. Okay, it runs pretty good at startup. Okay, now we're starting to hear it. Alright, now it's actually dropping in RPM. There we go. And it died. So that's the problem right there. Glad we caught it on camera. Alright, so it'll restart, but it's like it ran out of fuel. It takes a long time to crank over. And now it's going to run okay for a little bit, and it's going to do the same thing again, probably die again. At this point, it's been running for about 5, maybe 6 minutes. Okay guys, we've got to try to figure out what's wrong with this pickup, and I don't know what's wrong with it. So I thought maybe we could kind of talk about this Huey injection system, and I'll walk you guys how this system works. I made one of my little trademark drawings here. As far as I know, the Huey system, or hydraulic electronic unit injection, it was kind of a joint venture between Caterpillar International and Bosch. And I believe Bosch actually makes some of these components, like the high pressure oil pump and some parts of the injectors. And I don't know if they really had a hand in the engineering or if they're just a supplier of these parts, but for sure International used this system on several engines, most notably the DT series like your DT466E and the Powerstroke engines, so the 7.3 and the 6 liter Powerstroke. And then Caterpillar used this on a few engines. The only one I've really had any experience with is the 3126, and it more or less uses the same system as the International DT466E. Now, I don't know why they thought this was a good idea or why they ever wanted to develop this system, but it does work, and when it works, it actually works pretty well. It's kind of complicated. So the way the system actually works is that it uses high pressure oil to fire the injectors. So in a normal, like in a Cummins, let's say a 5.9 Cummins that everybody's familiar with, you have an actual injection pump. The actual high pressure fuel pressure is created by a injection pump that's driven off of the timing gears. So for all intents and purposes, the injection pump's almost like its own little engine. Now the other system we could use is what's called a unit injector. So that would be more like what's in my Cummins L10. So in that case, the injector is actually fired by a lobe on the camshaft. So the injector has its own rocker arm, and this piston is actually pushed down by the camshaft. Now the third option is we can have what's called common rail injection, which if you've ever worked on a Duramax, all the Duramax engines are common rail. And International actually went to common rail when they went to the 6.4 Powerstroke, and pretty much everything nowadays is some form of common rail injection. So in the common rail injection, all you do is just have super high pressure fuel, and then the injector is more or less just a valve that opens and allows the high pressure fuel to spray out into the engine. And all of the injectors share that same high pressure fuel on a common rail. But Before we had that, we had Huey injection. So the way the Huey injection system works, you have your oil down here in your oil pan, and it's going to suck up the suction tube into the low pressure oil pump, and the oil pump's going to distribute it throughout the engine, and it's going to divert part of it over here to this high pressure oil pump reservoir. And I kind of drew this wrong. It actually comes in sort of from the top so that this reservoir can never actually leak down. It's always going to be full of oil. And then there's a second oil pump here called a high pressure oil pump, and it draws oil out of this high pressure oil pump reservoir. And this thing's going to create a very high pressure oil, let's say anywhere from 500 up to maybe 4,000 psi of oil. And it's going to send that oil out into an oil rail, and the PCM up here, the brains of the operation, is going to monitor that pressure through what's called the ICP sensor, the injection control pressure sensor. And then depending on what it reads on the injection control pressure sensor, it's going to command the IPR, the injection pressure regulating valve, to open or close. And the more closed it is, the higher the pressure is going to build in this oil rail. The more open it is, the more oil is going to divert out of a bypass and drain back into the oil pan. So for all intents and purposes, this is just a relief valve or a pressure reducing valve. So once the PCM gets the oil here to the pressure that it wants, and it sends it out into the oil rail, then it's going to use the IDM, the injector driver module, to control a solenoid valve that's built into the actual fuel injector. So this thing here is just a valve, and it's going to open and allow fuel onto the top of this piston. And this is how the unit injector in the Huey system works. It has a large diameter piston that is filled with high pressure oil, and that acts onto a small diameter piston that actually pressurizes the fuel. So this is an intensifier. You have a large diameter here and a small diameter here. So you have to have a larger volume here, so you're going to get a smaller volume of fuel, but it's going to be at a much higher pressure. And then this section down here is more or less just like your pencil injector, like what you would have on the old school system with an actual injection pump. So basically they're using all this garbage over here to make the injector into its own injection pump. And the PCM controls all the timing, it controls the duty cycle of the IPR, it controls everything. So we don't have to have a physical connection back to the actual timing gears or the crankshaft or camshaft. We can use the cam sensor to fire these injectors using any kind of strategy that the PCM wants to. So I also drew this diagram of the actual injector, at least as far as I understand it. So the high pressure oil is going to come in here to the top. It's going to go through the spool valve into the intensifier piston. There's a big spring in here, and it pushes that piston down against that spring and intensifies this smaller piston that pushes, that pressurizes the fuel, and then it comes down here to this pencil injection part. So this part down here, like I said, is basically like your pencil injector, like on your normal injection pump. So you have high pressure fuel here, and we want it to reach a certain pressure before it opens up this valve so that we don't get, fuel dribbling out of here all the time. So once it gets to what we call the pop pressure, it's going to pop this thing open, spray out the fuel, and then once it drops below a certain threshold of pressure, this thing's going to shut fully, and we don't get that, that drippy injector that's going to cause, weird retarded timing issues and hard starting issues because it's going to leak down overnight. Anyway, on the 7.3 Powerstroke, I'm pretty sure that the solenoid valve up here is basically single acting, so it has a coil, an armature, that is going to push this spool valve against a spring. And then when the voltage drops off, the spring pushes the spool valve back. So it's a fairly simple system. One of the problems that International had with the 6-liter Powerstroke is that instead of having a spring here, they actually used 2 coils. And the coils would push and pull the solenoid valve back and forth. I guess their reasoning is that the coil can move the spool faster than the spring can, but it also has less force than the spring. So what would happen with the 6-liter Powerstrokes is these things would get kind of varnished up over time, and then the little spool valve wouldn't move back and forth quickly enough, and you get random misfires, and you get that fish bite feeling as you're driving down the road. And you can try to clean these, but usually the only way to fix them is to replace the injectors. They have a newer design that has an updated spool, and they aren't as prone to sticking in the bores. So one of the frustrations people have with the Powerstroke engines, you know, versus the more simple mechanical engines like a Cummins, is that when there's a computer in charge of everything, it takes a computer to fix a computer. So you're very limited on what you can do with these engines as far as diagnostics goes without some kind of a scan tool. And you can monitor ICP pressure and IPR percentage using a really cheap like OBD2 reader, as long as it can read live data. You don't have to spend $17,000 for a Snap-on Zeus, or a Ford IDS or whatever. You can just buy a decent code reader, let's say for, I don't know, $50 or $100 that can do live data. Should be able to show this. These are the two important things, the ICP pressure and the IPR percentage. There's other things that we need to monitor too, but those are the two things that it needs to work. So what often happens with these Huey systems is that they get to where they won't start when they're hot, and that's usually because there's some kind of a leak in the high pressure oil rail, and when the oil gets hot and thins out, you start to lose pressure down here. So basically the IPR valve would be commanded all the way closed, and the pump just can't make enough pressure to actually overcome whatever leak is happening there. I don't think that's the issue with our engine, because it runs really good when it's warmed up. The problem only occurs when it's cold. The other problem that sometimes happens with these things is the ICP sensor stops working, or it gets stuck at one pressure or another pressure, and the PCM can't interpret what's going on, so it won't fire the injectors through the injector driver module, even though it actually has enough oil rail pressure to do it, because it doesn't think that the pressure is high enough, because the ICP sensor is lying to the PCM. So in that case, you can just unplug the ICP sensor, and the PCM will default to some default value, let's say 700 psi or something like that, and at that point it will command the injectors to fire. And if your engine starts up and runs, then you just have a bad ICP sensor or some kind of bad wiring from the ICP sensor to the PCM. Okay, so anyway, let's try to recreate the problem that we had yesterday. It's actually the following day, and see if we can monitor ICP and IPR percentages while the truck is having its little fit. Okay guys, so one of the hardest parts about working on this truck is that there's a lot of variables. The previous owner of this truck, he went all Andrew Camerata on the fuel system, and they just hacked and slashed, and you will notice that the entire fuel bowl is missing. Also, the mechanical fuel pump is missing, and they have retained the original fuel pressure regulator, but kind of patched in some hoses and hard lines, and this is a real abortion. So it actually has a electronic fuel pump, like out of a 6-liter Powerstroke or a 6.4 Powerstroke, mounted down on the frame rail, and all of this super sketchy wiring over here is to run that electric fuel pump. But the problem is, how much do we trust this stuff? I already pulled these wiring harnesses apart because he went all bananas on this stuff, and upgraded to the newer style valve cover gaskets that have these are like the Super Duty style valve cover gaskets that have the supposedly better harness. But then he just kind of grafted all this stuff together and kind of wrapped this RF tape around it and sort of hoped for the best. Anyway, I removed the intake tube here. It's got a goofy cold air intake thing that he put on it, and a few brackets here so we can see what's going on. I just pulled the plug out here. Wanted to check the high pressure oil reservoir, and it's definitely full. What in the heck is going on here? Alright, well, I guess power of the visual inspection. That's your IPR valve right there, and that's the coil, the armature. I don't think it's supposed to be like that. Oh, there's the nut and everything laying down in the valley there. So the IPR valve came apart. Jeez. Well, there's your problem, lady. Okay, well maybe we should fix that first, huh? God, stupidest video on YouTube. Okay. Well, that obviously is a problem. I don't know if it's the problem, but it certainly isn't helping anything. So there's the pieces that fell off the back of it. Okay. Stupidest diagnostics on YouTube. Let's fire it up and see what it does. Okay, let's try starting the truck. This is after I put the jam nut back on the Ipr valve. And I'm using the Maxisys 906 BT from Autel. But like I said, you can use pretty much any OBD2 scanner that has live data. The only trick is this is a 95, so it's not 100% OBD2 compliant. Plus this is over 8,000 pounds GVW, so it doesn't have all the OBD2 stuff that it was required to have a year later on a smaller truck. So anyway, here we go. There we go. So we got ICP pressure, but now it still won't start. Hit the glow plugs again. I smell fuel, so I know it's... There we go. That looks okay, actually. It's kind of high pressure for idle, but that seems reasonable. Let's let it run for a while, see if it does the same thing again. Huh. So it just died. So that was not our problem. You see the ICP pressure started to drop, but the IPR valve never actually tried to move to compensate for it. See, ICP pressure came way back up. Yeah, it's kind of going all over. Man, what is it doing? IPR is fully open. 50% is full. God, that is crazy. Okay, that's the event right there. It starts going nuts. But that all seems way too high. Yeah, this is just nuts. The ICP readings have no correlation with the IPR valve. It's gonna die. You hear it every time the ICP pressure drops down below 1,000, it sounds normal. Oh man, this thing sucks. So that was quite an event right there. What set that off is I revved up the engine a little bit, so it boosted the throttle, and it just could not recover. So yeah, this is all wrong. Okay. Alright guys, I'm getting pretty confident that this truck needs an IPR valve, an injection pressure regulator valve. It just seems like there's no correlation between the injection control pressure and what the ECM is commanding the IPR valve to do. As far as I know, the valve runs basically an open loop, so the ECM sends out a signal to the IPR valve and it says, hey, you need to open or close such and such amount, and the way it decides how much to open or close that is depending on, you know, throttle position, I don't know, manifold pressure, but mostly the reading from the ICP sensor, the injection control pressure sensor. So if that sensor is saying, hey, the control pressure is already high enough, we need to bring this down, then the ECM, you know, lowers the duty cycle of the IPR valve. And for whatever reason, it seems like there's just no correlation. Now what I don't understand, and what's really bugging me, is we know that our ICP pressure is too high. It's running like, I don't know, 1100 PSI at idle. It should be like half that. And for whatever reason, the ECM keeps commanding it to go higher, up to 50% duty cycle. And I know it gets mad because there isn't a corresponding change in the ICP pressure that it's looking for, but I don't understand why it's initially commanding it to go up. That doesn't make sense to me, but I guess maybe if the thing just, you know, isn't getting the feedback that it needs, it's just kind of going crazy, or it has some default strategy to try to go up or down to look for a change in the ICP sensor. I don't know. What we kind of need is a known good, and I don't have one, but I think I know where we can find one. Alright, here we go. We're working on my dad's 95 F250, and it actually works correctly. Not a whole lot different. It's just weird seeing one that hasn't been all molested. Okay, almost 15 minutes into it, and it's finally running the way it should be. The oil must be up to temperature. For some reason, I don't have an oil temperature PID, so I can't check that. But this is what it should have been like all along. Okay, so we go ahead and pull that IPR valve out of there. I'm feeling pretty confident. I mean, I don't know how to 100% test it because, like I said, it's an open loop system. So in my mind, if the ICP sensor can't control the IPR valve, then the IPR valve has to be the problem, because, you know, just using our ears, we can confirm what the ICP sensor is saying, which is that the pressure is too high. That's why we're hearing all this knocking and pinging and, you know, carrying on. So this is the high pressure oil pump reservoir. And I'm going to go ahead and suck the oil out of it using a big syringe, basically. The reservoir holds about, I don't know, about 1.5 quarts, I suppose. And this tool is super handy. This little, I don't know, you call it a fluid extractor or whatever. It's like a big syringe. And I bought it on a whim one day, and I found all kinds of uses for it. Okay, so there's our IPR valve. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of curious what's inside this thing. So I'm pretty sure it's already junk, so we might as well crack it open and see what's going on inside. Okay, we got a tiny little pin. I guess that's our pintle that the coil acts on. Okay guys, I don't really see a smoking gun here. I mean, there's lots of little pieces and parts, and they all seem to be, for the most part, okay. There's some kind of spool or something inside of this portion of the valve that I can't get apart. It must be pressed together, so that doesn't seem to be serviceable. You know, normally if we were having some kind of high pressure oil problem, you know, like especially a no start condition where, you know, it just won't build high pressure, you know, and we could pop the valve covers off, look for an obvious leak, and then, you know, usually it's just the IPR valve won't close. But in this case, it seems like the IPR valve won't close or open reliably. It's not doing what the ECM expects to see when it commands it to be opened or closed. The only thing that still bothers me is I don't understand why it would command the duty cycle on the IPR valve to be higher, even though it's trying to lower the actual pressure in the system. You know, why do we get that weird ramp up in duty cycle at the kind of at the end there before it dies? So I don't know. It's got to be some kind of a strategy with the ECM that it doesn't know what to do when the ICP pressure that it's reading doesn't jive with what it's telling the IPR valve to do. The only other option is that it has a bad ECM, or there's some other input to the system that's throwing it off, and you know, it's something that I'm overlooking. And I guess if we're going to throw parts at it, we'll throw parts at it in the order of, you know, price. So we'll start with the Ipr valve. It's about 250 bucks. If we still have problems, then I guess maybe we'll go after the ECM. It does seem like the signals that are going out to the Ipr valve match what we're seeing on the scan tool. The only thing is I didn't check it with the scope while it was having one of its fits, you know, where it was losing control and surging and everything like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's just the temperature part of it is messing with me, because that seems so likely to be an electrical problem, you know, that gets cold and some solder joint opens up or something, and as soon as it warms up, everything's cool again. I don't know a reliable way to verify the function of the Ipr valve. Really, the best way to test it is with a known good, and I don't have that. I do have a known good Ipr valve for a 6-liter Powerstroke, but it's quite a lot different, and I don't think it would help us in this situation. In the meantime, there's plenty of other things we can do to this truck. So this is a seal kit for the oil cooler, and I've already been into this once before. I took the oil cooler off about 9 months ago, sometime late in the spring last year, and resealed it. One of the O-rings, big O-rings here, was cracked, and ever since I replaced it, it's been leaking out of the rear oil cooler pedestal. One of these formed gaskets is leaking. So anyway, I used the same Felpro kit before. They warrantied it out for me, but it's only like $8 for this kit. So anyway, we'll throw that in there, and then we're gonna have to drain the coolant out to do that. So I want to go ahead and put a thermostat in, because my thermostat doesn't open reliably. So I got a new thermostat gasket, and it's overdue for an oil change. So we're gonna do that. Plus, I mean, we're gonna have the high pressure oil system open anyway, so good idea to change the oil while we're doing that. We're also going to replace the block heater, because the one I have shorted out and almost burned the truck down. Actually got extremely lucky. I plugged it in one morning, and I was just standing at the counter getting my lunch ready or something in the morning, and I just happened to look out the window and see flames coming out of the cord. So yeah, right here where it plugged into the extension cord that I had, it actually caught on fire, and you know, flames going up the front of the grill. So I ran out and unplugged it real quick. I can't believe it would do that without popping a breaker, but it did. Well, what's all this green goo about? That doesn't look good. Oh boy. Water pump? Kinda looks like it. Well, I guess we better do a pressure test before we drain the coolant out. Great. Okay, I'd say we're leaking out of the upper radiator hose, right where it goes into the thermostat housing right there. Must have a bad clamp or something. So we're gonna have that off anyway, so that's no big deal. Okay, that thermostat housing is the only leak I see. I just tightened up the hose clamp a little bit and it sealed it right up, so we'll get off easy on that one. Anyway, I'll go ahead and drain the coolant out, and we'll go out to the oil cooler first. Hope you guys don't have to go to the bathroom. So we'll pop the oil filter off. I like to drain them before I take them off, especially when they're, you know, big ones like this. This is a homemade tool that I have for doing this. I made this back when I was a kid, probably 16 years old. It's just an old screwdriver. It's the old style where the handle is forged all the way through, and it's got these two little kind of wood scales. And I just ground it to a point, and it makes a really good filter piercing tool. Because sometimes on big trucks where they have big oil filters, they're so heavy and awkward trying to get them down out of there that you'll knock them over and spill oil all over the floor, so it's better just to drain them out. So while we're waiting for those things to drain, I'll show you the rest of the camaraderization of the fuel system down here. So what this is an electric fuel pump off of like a 2003 or newer Super Duty with the 6-liter or 6.4-liter Powerstroke diesel engines. They might use this with the 6.7 too, I can't remember. Anyway, these make about 60 psi of pressure using an electric pump right here. And then there's also a filter built in here and a water separator. This is a drain for your water separator. And then this is just a Caterpillar filter base, so that's a standard Cat filter number right there, fuel filter. But you see he just kind of jammed some rubber fuel hose over top of the old, where the old quick disconnect lines would have plugged in. And you know, it works, but it's pretty sketchy. It leaks a lot. I had to tighten up these hose clamps all the time. The wiring is super dodgy, and you know, the more I look at it, the more I just want to tear it all apart and put it back the way that it should be, or make some proper, you know, quick disconnect fuel lines with plastic line. Because the problem is, none of this rubber hose is rated for biodiesel, so eventually it's all going to get hard and crack, and we're going to be stranded. You know, and you got hoses that say not for use with fuel injection systems, and you know, hardware store barb fittings, and you know, whatever. So I had a few guys that were kind of curious on a follow-up of this dipstick kind of fitting right here in the side of the pan. We resealed that using a kit from, what was it, dieselorings.com or something like that. Anyway, this is 6 months later and it has not leaked a drop. So I'm real happy with the repair we did there. It seemed pretty sketchy at the time, but yeah, it's worked out perfectly. Okay, so on the driver's side of the engine, this is the oil cooler right here. It's a regular log style cooler, just like any, you know, Cummins or whatever engine would have on it. And this is the oil filter base / oil cooler pedestal. So in order to get this oil cooler off, we have to take this oil cooler pedestal off, and we also have to take out the block heater. Now the block heater actually sticks inside the block here, you know, a fair amount, it's a couple inches. So you can't get the whole thing wrangled apart without taking this block heater out first. So don't make that mistake. So normally what happens with these oil coolers is there's a couple of big O-rings right here on the actual oil cooler itself, and they will get, you know, hard and brittle over the years and crack, and you'll start getting a lot of oil leaking out of here on cold startup. And then once the thing warms up, your oil leak will be less or even go away. So in that case, you just got to take this rear pedestal off, pull the thing off, replace the O-rings. It's not a big deal. But where ours is leaking is from this gasket right here, which I replaced as part of replacing the oil cooler seals, but something has gone wrong. Oh, baby. So gotta have your bucket handy, because even though we drained the radiator, we did not drain the block. Okay. Now I don't know if you guys can see it, but there is a drain plug right here on the side of the block. I believe that is the coolant drain. Okay, the oil cooler is out, and I think I see the problem. So this oil pressure regulator is supposed to be staked in there. See, there's 4 spots where it was originally staked into the aluminum housing, and you see right there on the gasket, it's missing the big chunk right there. So I don't know, maybe I did that when I installed it. This oil pressure regulator was popped out or something, and I didn't get that lined up before I tightened it up, or I don't know, maybe the gasket was defective. I just didn't see it when I put it together. But yeah, there's your problem, lady. Okay, glad we found something. I was worried there might be a crack in the housing or something like that. And, by the way, if you think you can change one of these oil coolers without making a mess on the floor, you are delusional. So just plan on that. And if you're working on the ground, laying on your back, I feel for you, buddy. I've done them that way before, and it sucks. So normally when I've done these oil cooler jobs in the past, I just leave that front oil cooler pedestal alone. You see it right there dripping some oil and coolant on the floor. If it's not leaking, there's no reason really to mess with it, but it kind of looks like ours maybe is leaking a little bit. Tough to say because everything leaks on this truck, but I think I'll go ahead and pull it out of there. It's just two bolts holding it in there, and we have a gasket for it. We might as well replace it. But if you're just looking to replace the O-rings on the oil cooler, there's no reason to remove that front pedestal. And I think if you guys watch Diesel Tech Ron on YouTube, that's how he tells you to do it as well. Okay, everything is clean-ish and ready to go back together. I took a small punch and just tapped these stakes a little bit more so that this pressure regulating valve or relief valve, whatever it is, will stay in the filter base or the pedestal here. Okay, new O-rings installed on the oil cooler. Lubed them up with some Sil-Glide, and we're ready to shove that thing back in. Now it has these ears that keep the thing from kind of oriented the right direction, and that's only going to matter on the rear pedestal. The front pedestal does not have this little notch right here. These oil coolers are incredible. I don't care what you do with them, they just leak oil forever. Let's go. Okay, I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it. How much oil can it leak on my floor? Okay. Kind of like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, pry bar. There we go. Alright, that's probably good. Okay, new block heater. And the new block heater comes with a new cord. So we're going to have to fish this through. It mounts to some special little tabs on the frame rail. Anyway, I'll take care of that. Okay, we're all done underneath the truck for now. I still got to tie up this cord for the block heater, but I can do that, I think, mostly from the top. Here's the old cord, like I said, the one that caught on fire. We're not going to reuse that. New oil filter, pre-filled with oil, and I got the oil drained out of the pan. So yeah, let's go up top and finish up. So the thermostat looks to be pretty easy. I just loosened the serpentine belt, and I went ahead and popped these hoses loose. So that's the one that was leaking. You can see that neck is pretty rusty. So anyway, this has to come off here anyway to change the thermostat. So, be a good time to clean it up. Of course, typical International. Use the smallest freaking bolt heads possible. In dissimilar metals, in coolant. Little 8mm heads on these guys. Well, I'd say not its first thermostat. Somebody left behind the trail of RTV silicone. But let's not judge, because we're probably going to do the same thing based on how rusty this thing is. There we go. Okay, we got to clean up that gasket surface. I showed this tool in a previous video. It's a roll lock adapter with this extra long arbor on it. And I was saying about how it's real handy for doing thermostats because you can't reach down in there easily. And then I promised I would put a link to where you could buy one of these, but I'll be jiggered, I can't find it anywhere. I'm pretty sure I bought this off the Mac Tools truck eons ago. If anybody knows who makes this or where a guy can buy one, put it in the comment box and I'll pin it or whatever, and yeah, you guys can pick one up for yourselves. Otherwise, I'm sure it would be, you know, pretty straightforward deal to make one. This stuff all just kind of threads together, but it really is handy for doing stuff just like this. Okay, everything's clean. New thermostat. Appears to be the right one. And the new thermostat gasket. Now, the problem is, take a look at this coolant elbow. She's pretty rough. So, first thing we're going to do is pound these bolt holes back down so that this thing's actually flat. Then, we're going to put some RTV silicone around here, just like the last guy did. And I know that's against the rules. You're not supposed to use RTV silicone with an O-ring, because the O-ring's supposed to seal all by itself. But you guys try that and let me know how it works. I'm going to put a little bit of an insurance policy on here, because I don't want to do this again. We're probably already going to be back in here again pretty soon, because the top part of this coolant elbow looks pretty sketchy too. I'd say we're almost through right there. So that's what 25 Illinois winters will get you. Okay, a little bit of silicone. Drop this guy on here like such. And then anti-seize on the bolts. And there's certain applications where you always want to use anti-seize on a bolt. Anytime you're dealing with a thermostat or a water pump bolt, in my opinion, unless it goes into the water jacket, in which case it needs a sealant, you need to put anti-seize on it. It's typically you're dealing with dissimilar metals, you know, steel and aluminum, plus high heat, plus the corrosiveness of the coolant itself if it isn't maintained. Okay. Didn't AVE just do a big to-do about how you never start a bolt using a socket? You know, I don't want to rant, but you read all this stuff on the internet. Oh, you never start a bolt with a socket. Oh, you never put RTV on a gasket. Oh, you never put RTV on an O-ring. Okay. Well, pretty soon you start believing all that stuff and you never get anything done. Every rule has an exception. Okay, torque to factory spec. Don't put your thermostat in upside down. Usually that is possible. So one other thing too, because this neck was all rusty, we need to inspect the inside of the hose. And you can see it's all kind of covered with that scaly rust. So I've found if you just kind of knead it a little bit, work it around, you can generally clean that stuff up and reuse the hose. And we'll just take a rag and scrub the inside of it and everything will be just fine. But we don't want to just jam it back on with all this crusty, scaly buildup inside here. Okay. Well, we'll use a new hose clamp. That old one was pretty crusty. Well, I think we need a new tensioner. That doesn't sound too good. I don't think that's normal. See the way it kind of kicks out like that? So we'll add that to the shopping list for when this thing goes under the knife again. And looky what I've got. I don't want it getting out of there, I can tell you that. One new Ipr valve. And if you notice, the second to last number there is a C. I believe that's an international part number. I did call my international dealership here to see if they could get one for me. I don't know, my dealership, the international dealership here, is terrible. You tell them you got a 95 7.3 Powerstroke and it's just like, well, we can't find parts for that. And then I think the Ford dealership might actually be worse. My Ford dealership here does not sell parts. They get all their parts through an independent auto parts store who is a Motorcraft distributor. Does that make any sense? How can you be a Ford dealership if you don't sell parts? Anyway, we got it. I'll throw it in real quick. You don't need to see that. Super easy. So this does appear to have an updated design. There is no plug in the end here, so we can actually kind of see down inside. Anyway, $250 from my local auto parts supplier for the genuine Motorcraft part. They have an aftermarket one too, but it's really not that much cheaper. It's like $198. So for that kind of money, I'm going OEM. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and prime the high pressure oil pump reservoir. So we'll just pour some oil back in that same hole that we sucked the oil out of earlier. Otherwise, we're going to have to crank and crank and crank and crank and crank and crank until the actual engine oil pump fills up the high pressure oil pump reservoir. So this will just help the engine start a little bit easier. Okay, we got oil, we got some coolant. We'll have to top that off probably once we get it warmed up, but it's good enough to get it started. I say we start it and see what happens. Sounds pretty good. Well, normally they run like crap for about 20 minutes before all the air gets out of that high pressure oil system. Anytime you tamper with that, you get air inside. It takes a long time to bleed out. Well, runs pretty good. Now the catch is that it's warm in here, so I guess we won't really know until we put her outside for a cold soak. But I think we've got it licked. Even when it was warm, it never ran that good when you first started it up. So I feel pretty confident that we got the problem solved. I'm going to uncamerata these wiring harnesses and put the intake and stuff back together. Then, yeah, I think we'll be done for now. I'll have to order a new tensioner. I thought you guys might like to see this camerata wiring here. So they did actually solder the wires, but I think only maybe 2 of them actually have the shrink wrap covering the conductors, and maybe 3 of them. The rest of them they just pretty much completely missed. So bare conductors. That's why they had them all wrapped up with tape. And I mean, these are some sloppy solder joints. And then this RF shielding, that's just a total nightmare. But it gets better. Check out the wiring for that electric fuel pump. So it actually has a relay, which is a good thing, but that's about the only part of it that's good. So we've got a exposed quick disconnect terminal down here. We got a 40 amp fuse on about a, I don't know, maybe a 14 gauge wire here. We got another, even worse, open quick disconnect terminal. That one could pretty easily snap up against the frame. And then to power the relay, looks like we just jammed the wire in beside this 30 amp fuse. I don't know what that is, key on, engine on or something. So we'll fix all that stuff, don't worry. Okay, that's a little bit more like it. We're still gonna have a big wad here. I can't stagger the wires because everything was already, you know, spliced together once before. But this is the way I like to do it, using the uninsulated butt connectors and the marine rated shrink tubing. So I showed this little assortment kit that I have in a previous video working on a Ford, and guys were asking me where I got it. I was thinking I got it from McMaster Car, but turns out that's not true. I bought it from this connectorsupply.com. So I think they sell through Amazon. I'll put a link in the description if you guys are interested in buying this. I like to use these things, especially the butt connectors. The actual butt connectors themselves are made by Molex. Okay, progress on the wiring. So instead of jamming the wire underneath the blade of the fuse, I went underneath the fuse box and just tapped into the actual wire itself, and then I patched another one that had a spot rubbed through on it. Little butt splice here, and then I think we're gonna have to just replace this entire wire running down the firewall here to the fuel pump. I've cut 4 inches off of it now, and I'm still finding all this white crusty nastiness. That's just from the salt kind of leaching down inside the insulation. Alright, so here's the bottom of that wire that I was showing you that's all jacked up. And this is basically like how not to wire something. So you see what they did here, to get a ground for the pump, they just put a self-tapping screw through the frame rail. And you know, that might work in Arizona, but I'd be surprised if that thing makes it another year in our climate. What you want to do is take your ground wire and run it all the way up, back up there by the fuse panel, and ground it to one of the proper body grounds that's put, you know, high up on the body somewhere where it can't get all rusty. What I'm going to do is, I've got some more of this jacketed wire. This stuff's great because you don't have to put it inside a loom wrap. So I'll just run a jacketed wire from down here up there to that power distribution box. Well, I need to stop touching things. This is the charge wire off the alternator, and it had a big wad of electrical tape wrapped around it. So I started peeling, and this is the surprise I found underneath. They did the old vice grip crimp routine, so we're gonna have to fix that. Okay, so I've got a new terminal, but it's a little bit too big to fit on the post of the alternator. It's like a little bit too fat right here. And it looks to me like the old one was probably the same way, and somebody just ground the outside of it down so that it would fit. So anyway, I think for now we're going to just go ahead and try to reuse this one. I sort of straightened out the barrel as well as I could, and we'll jam it on there, see how far we get. So instead of trying to crimp it with a pair of these, we're going to use the right tool. This one's made by Stacon. It'll do anywhere from a number 8 to a number 2 uninsulated terminal. So I think this is 4-gauge wire, but we're going to try the number 6 crimp spot because it's already been crimped once before. There we go. Doesn't look too bad. Okay, I think that'll do just fine. Well, I think we're done. At least done enough for today. And then I did my best to tidy up this wiring over here. So I also swapped out that 40 amp fuse for a 15. We'll start there, see how we do. There's no reason to have a 40 amp fuse on a fuel pump. It only pulls about 6 amps full tilt, so we'll do the 15. And then these inline fuse holders are pretty nice, but I prefer this style with the snap cap, just to keep all the salt and crud out of that fuse, because it'll eventually turn green and crusty where I live. And then I moved the ground for the fuel pump up here off of the firewall. That's a good location for a ground, nice and high, away from all the salt spray and rust and corrosion. That thing down on the frame rail would never last. So I know that I approach a borderline Squatch 253 level of fussiness when it comes to wiring, but
I deal with wiring problems almost every day, and you know, you just keep seeing the same things over and over again. And when it comes to wiring on a vehicle in our environment, you just can't cut corners. You have to do it right, or you're going to be doing it again. Okay, let's see what our ICP and IPR graphs look like post IPR valve replacement. Start it up real quick. About the same. Come on, baby. Much better. So that's pretty much in line with what we saw on my dad's truck. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Looks good.
Well, I think that's going to be it. Sorry, the video kind of went on a little bit longer than what I expected. Yeah, once we cracked that thing open, there was a lot more wrong than what I realized. I had no idea the wiring was so messed up on the truck, and I'm happy that we went ahead and fixed it while we had a chance. Yeah, as far as the engine goes, I'm pretty happy with our repair. The truck starts good. It restarts good when it's hot. I took the truck on about a 25-minute test drive. Everything checks out. It's got good power, good acceleration, no missing, no surging, no knocking, no none of that, you know, nonsense. It idles good. Everything's going to be just fine, I think. You know, don't be surprised if it runs kind of rough for the first maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Anytime you get air inside that Huey system, it makes them kind of cough and sputter, and it takes at least that long for the system to work all the air out. And then once they get bled out, you don't have to worry about it again. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and if I don't get another video out in time, Happy New Year's. Well, now I get to clean up the shop because it looks like a Bangladeshi shipbreaking yard in here. Well, how about an experiment for the two guys who are still watching? How many comments do you think I'm going to get about this seat? Because there is a small but very dedicated group of people on the YouTube who have a obsessive need to point out the obvious. Yes, I am aware that this truck needs a new seat. I have noticed that this truck that I drive every day could use a new seat. Just like my shoes. Every time I show these boots on YouTube, I get several comments saying I could use a new pair of boots. Somehow people think that I haven't noticed that these boots that I wear every single day have a hole in them.